Hello, everyone. We'll just give a moment or two to allow people to connect to the webinar. I can still see people just joining, so we'll just give it a moment to let everyone get connected and then we'll get going. Okay, I think we'll make a start. I can see one or two participants still connecting, but I think it's a couple of minutes past the start time already. So good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, to everyone. My name is Sian Pryor, and I'm the Director of Shipping Policy for Seas at Risk. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our very topical webinar, the real cost of staying on trend. This webinar is the second in our One Planet Shipping webinar series following the Space Imports webinar that we organised in the middle of October, which is available to view on our website. This series will explore different topics linked to the just and sustainable shipping transition, and we'll keep you posted on future events. Before we get started, I would just like to mention two housekeeping matters. First of all, please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available after today on the Seas at Risk website. And secondly, any questions for the Q&A session are very welcome and can be submitted via the Q&A section of the webinar, which should be near the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to answer all of the questions in the second half of the webinar. I'm going to start with a few scene-setting words, and we'll then hand over to Bavo Smets, Seas at Risk's shipping policy team, who will introduce and give the floor to our three distinguished speakers today. Unfortunately, James Meadway, Senior Director of Economics at Opportunity Green, cannot be with us today, but we're very pleased to welcome Aoife O'Leary, CEO and founder of Opportunity Green, who is jumping in for him. The panelists will each be asked two questions addressing overconsumption, shipping, and emissions, and possible solutions. And then after that, there will be time for a Q&A session, and they will happily answer any remaining questions. So just to get us going and set the scene and the rationale behind today's webinar, our global trade system is built on constant consumption and rapid turnover of goods, which affects the economy and drives the shipping industry, but also has a huge impact on the environment. Yesterday, Seas at Risk posted an article on its website with the same title as the webinar, The Real Cost of Staying on Trend, and you can access this article by scanning the QR code on your screen. The article is clear. Today, our demand for stuff results in enormous amounts of goods and products, including textiles, but also fuels, plastic, pellets, and other disposable goods being shipped across the globe every day. The system drives overproduction, overconsumption, and results in high emissions from maritime transport. With Black Friday just past and Christmas ahead of us, in this webinar, we are going to take a look at how these trends connect and investigate what real solutions could look like, how recycling, circular economy approaches, shorter and more local supply chains, and reducing the overall demand can reduce our collective climate footprints, protect the environment, and reshape the shipping sector. Experts from different fields will examine the global economic forces that are shaping the shipping sector and will set out how that sector can become a key part of a more sustainable, fair, and resilient trade system. I'm going to leave it there and hand over now to Bavo, who will introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sian, for setting the scene, and hello to everyone. We do indeed have three very distinguished speakers with us today that will each shine the light on the topic. And I'm going to quickly introduce them. Our first speaker of the day is Eva Binde. Eva has worked for more than 10 years in the Brussels bubble as a new policy consultant and is now as the head of circular economy in charge of the circular economy policy work of the European Environmental Bureau, the EEB. There she focuses on different policy areas related to circularity, including reuse, and recycle solutions. Good morning, Eva. And good evening to Christian de Beukelaar, our second speaker, who is based in Melbourne, Australia, where he works as a senior lecturer in culture and climate studies at the University of Melbourne. And over the last decade, Christian's research centered on the future of maritime transport, issuing multiple publications on wind propulsion, but also on international trade. Eva O'Leary, lastly, is the CEO and founder of Opportunity Green, a non-profit working on the decarbonization of aviation and shipping. Eva has a vast experience at the intersection of climate policies and international shipping. And last summer, she launched with Opportunity Green, a very well received report on the reduction of shipping demand. So good morning to you as well, Eva, and thank you again for jumping in for James Reed, who unfortunately cannot be with us today. Good. Well, this is indeed an exceptionally interesting combination of speakers, so I will no longer take any more time and give the floor to them. In what follows, they will step by step and guided by some general questions, unpack the complex theme of today, shed some light, and provide us with hopefully some insights from their respective backgrounds and expertise. Voila, and I would very much like to direct the first question of today to you, Eva. So let's start by taking a look at what is going wrong. And I was wondering how you believe that today's consumption patterns, of course, then mostly referring to Western consumption patterns, how they impact global trade. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much for this excellent question. And maybe first, to those of you who don't know the European Environmental Bureau, we are a large network of civil society organizations active in the environment with more than 190 members in 41 countries. So together representing more than 30 million citizens' views on the environment. So just wanted to share that. And then jumping straight into your questions, I think it's increasingly impossible to disconnect today's consumption patterns from global trade. And I have a little illustration to get the conversation started. This graph here shows the absolutely mind-boggling increase in low-cost direct-to-consumer imports in the last few years, which are largely driven by manipulative online sales behaviors and the growth of large, low-cost online marketplaces. So as you can see here, in just a few short years since 2022, the annual imports to the EU have absolutely boomed to a projected 8 billion packages below 150 euros in 2025. Now, short caveat, this is my estimation. We have the 2024 figures, and I saw some figures from Finland, and I extrapolated that to the whole EU. So if it turns out to be not 8 billion, okay, there might be some adjustments to make there, but if in the trends and in all the reports, it looks like we're certainly seeing an increase for this year. And these are just the ones, the packages that are imported directly by consumers from outside the EU. So it does not include shopping within the EU single market, online or offline, just online direct to consumer. This is wild. If you look at the numbers and crunch them a little bit, that would be 30 per adult or more than 20 million per day. This is not responding to our basic needs. This is not replacing EU shopping with something cheaper online. This is consumption in hyper overdrive. And add to that the components shipped for EU production or products shipped for sales in EU stores, and we can see this mounting problem. And to me, this is an environmental, a social, and a governance problem. Much of what comes in should not even be used because of the potentially harmful designs, and large swathes of it are unsuitable for reuse, So this is a direct collection and waste problem and a massive contributor to the overburdening of municipalities and redistributive social enterprises, many of which are already on the brink of collapse. If you look at the statistics globally, resource consumption has increased 2.3% per year and tripled in the last 50 years. This is beyond population growth and poverty alleviation. It's an unhealthy pattern of extraction, use, disposal, and a growing mountain of waste. We know that we've surpassed 7 out of 9 planetary boundaries. We've reached several climate tipping points. And this consumption is a huge part of the problem because of the resource extraction, but also, of course, because of how it is shipped or transported around the world. So I'm very curious to hear what my other panelists have to say about these interesting aspects of the problem.
Thank you so much, Eva. And I'm curious as well what the other panelists have to say. I'm gonna straight I'm gonna move on and give the floor to Christian. Christian, we've learned that today's consumption patterns do impact global trade heavily, but what effect does it have on shipping today? Could you give us some insight on that?
Thank you so much, Bavo and Eva, for opening today. And I think I might be mistaken, but I think the vast majority of the imports that you were talking about, Eva, are actually air freighted into the EU. So that wouldn't necessarily be counted towards the shipping industry itself. But I think that shows also a very interesting and deeply problematic shift of modalities of cargo transport, particularly for these smaller items. But if we can jump to the illustration that we have, Bavo, one of the things that I was constantly encountering as a researcher was that ships or shipping transports 80 to 90% of everything we consume. And that's a claim that's made in almost every policy paper, in every document, in every academic article, in every newspaper article about shipping. But looking at that, I thought, okay, great. That's nice to know. That's an awful lot. But then I encountered a wholly different number that was not looking at international transport of goods, but that was looking at the material footprint, or the metabolism of the global economy, so to speak. And there it came down to a total of over 100 billion tons. And I emailed Jan Hofman, who was still at UNCTAD at that point, to ask him if there was a mistake in the UNCTAD maritime reviews of maritime transport, or if I was completely missing something, but he didn't really know the answer either. So I started digging into this together with Phil Steinberg, and we found that you basically have these two completely different data sets. What we see here in terms of shipping being 80 or 90% of trade or consumption is focused on international maritime transport, what goes between countries by ship. The other number looks at all the materials that go into the final products. Some of them may be shipped or not. And some of these raw materials are shipped, others are not. But 85% of those raw materials are not traded internationally. The vast, vast majority of the material footprint is used domestically. To give you an idea, what we're looking at is 9.6 billion tons of primary agricultural commodities, 13.9 billion tons of fossil fuels, or 4.3 billion tons of cement being used on an annual basis. So that gives you an idea that, looking at shipping, transporting 11 or 12 billion tons by now is actually a very small fraction of the total material footprint that we face. So what I'm trying to do here is not to say that shipping is actually really small, because it's not. It's still 12 billion tons, which is enormous. That's 1.5 tons per person per year. but the total material footprint that we're, using up every year is over 100 billion tons or 12.5 tons per capita. And of course, that's not equally distributed. And shipping really helps, extracting some of those resources from poorer countries and bringing them to richer countries by and large. So what we have here is shipping is a huge industry, but when looking at planetary boundaries and a material footprint, the problem is enormously much bigger, which calls into question some of the claims that if you reduce shipping emission, or if you reduce shipping demand, you don't only reduce shipping emissions, but also the pressure on the environment. And there's certainly an argument for consuming and shipping less, but it isn't going to be the solution to that bigger 100 billion ton material footprint problem. And that's kind of where I want to leave things right now and see how we can build on that with the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. So it seems that everything is connected, but as you say, still shipping is a very big sector and accounts for a big share of the pollution. So I was wondering, Eva, if you could tell us a little bit more on how then you think demand reduction, because with opportunity when you worked on that as well, how demand reduction can reduce shipping emissions and what the link between that is.
Yeah, definitely. And I also have a neat little illustration to speak to. So if you could pull that up. Hello everyone, and thanks for having me in the webinar. We produced a report earlier this year looking at basically what is in the containers on the ships. As I guess Christian has just kind of teed it up with, actually, maybe you need to do a lot more than just reduce shipping demand, but I'm going to still focus in on the shipping demand and what we can do there. So this graph illustrates what is in containers in 2015 and 2023. We did the 2 years to kind of show that actually it doesn't really vary all that much. It's relatively static. There's a bit of change, but that shows that if you can find the right policies targeting the right parts of what's in the containers, that actually over time you should be able to have policy that has real impact. And the other, there's various things we can go into, but I think it's important to say as well, container shipping is, as Christian's like, the problem is this big, but we're going to focus in on this. I'm then going to put it down to just the container part of the shipping industry, at least for this bit that I'm speaking to, partially because, I think as Eva has illustrated, the consumer end of it is where, at the end of the day, it's all driving towards in many ways. And we also have a lot of policy levers there that we could actually use. And also container ships, while it's about 15% of the volume of stuff that is shipped, it's about 60% of the value of what is shipped. So if you are going to target policies, you could potentially do things there that would have less of an impact compared to lower value, higher volume goods. And container shipping is the part of the shipping industry that has the longest routes. So by reducing anything you're doing on the container side, you actually have a disproportionate impact on emissions as well. So to dig into this graph a little bit more, these are the volume. So it's kind of, if the volume is 100%, how much of each of these categories is. But I think it's also important to say that container shipping has doubled in size over the past 20 years. So you're having the same percentage in 2015 and 2023. It's going to be much more in 2023. So I just want to illustrate that as well. This does not give you the scale of how it's grown. But taking electrical machinery there, the top category. So these are standard international classifications, and then you can break them down under that into more and more kind of refined as to what's actually in those containers. But taking that first category, so it was 6.5% of everything shipped in 2023. That actually equates to 12 million tons of CO2 equivalent, which, to put that in context for all of you who would also struggle with that, like myself, That is 2 years worth of every single return flight from London to New York. So it's not insignificant at all. It's definitely something that if we can find the right kind of levers to actually reduce, we can have significant impact. And I can talk, and I will talk more about it, but I'll leave it there for now and move to the next question.
Thank you very much, Eva. So it seems that the potential is there and that we can clearly see it, but how are we going to realize it, and how can we realize the demand reduction, and Eva, could a circular economy save us?
I love this question because it depends so much on how we define what a circular economy is. And I think, I mean, the two other speakers have highlighted some very important points, I think, on the overall material footprint and whether or not it's transported by maritime freight or by air. The real problem is in the intrinsic linking of extraction and economic value. And I think if you go to my little illustration on this slide, I think for us, the only way to think of a circular economy is one where we first reduce, rethink, and redesign how we consume, and we disconnect economic value from resource extraction. This is, I think, the high level resource consumption, resource use reduction targets that we need to set in place to rethink how we conceptualize well-being, to rethink how we operate, really, because it's no secret that we are talking about a Western-centric consumption patterns. It is no secret that we consume far more than what planetary boundaries can sustain, but also far more than we are consuming, far more than what can be used and produced in the EU itself. So we are extracting and stealing resources from around the world as well. So it's an unhealthy pattern that needs to start from this upper green box. And what we did when we first heard there would be a Circular Economy Act was to really look at how, in our view, we could link this circular economy concept to something that also fits within the new words of the day of competitiveness, resilience, and autonomy. And to us, it's really the only way to be autonomous and resilient is to lower the material and energy costs. That's a good way to reduce import dependencies, is to really have less dependencies on extractive materials. And this could also be an opportunity for the EU to lead, not in how much we make or in how much we get out of recycled materials only, but also in circular business models, in quality, in added value, in long-term competitiveness, so we can really think of disruptive innovations and ways of doing things that are different and that do not rely on having material inputs in the same way. And of course, the second part of this, I think, is also really important, because in the reuse, repair, and repurpose space, there are local jobs and businesses, there's European craftsmanship, there are after-sale markets and access to affordable quality products. So this is eco-design, this is reuse, repair, but I think really these two, and that's why they're green, is in our concept of a real circular economy where we should put our efforts. Now, unfortunately, what the Circular Economy Act that is going to be published in Q3 2026 is looking like is a focus more on the recycling secondary market for raw materials and recovery of materials, recovery of waste electric and electronic equipment. I'm not saying that we shouldn't collect and recover those, but I think the point here is that if we focus the circular economy on what we can recycle, then they will not solve the problem. We need to really put the emphasis on the higher rungs of the waste hierarchy if we want the circular economy to do anything about this problem.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I think, of course, it's crucial, but a lot of it also linked to financial incentives or financial structure that goes with it. So Eva, I'm wondering what financial measures can be used to promote such initiatives and to reduce shipping demand?
Yeah, absolutely. So what is really interesting about this is we had a natural, well, natural is probably the wrong word. We had an experiment earlier this year. The experiment's probably also the wrong word. With Trump's tariffs, where there was basically a big shock to the global shipping industry, as Trump brought in at least 10% on all countries, which now we're seeing a number of carve-outs and exceptions and all the rest of it, and who knows what it'll look like in a year, et cetera, et cetera. But the shipping industry is highly, I guess, susceptible to different shocks. And so we saw that with COVID. We see it with things like when there's attacks in the Red Sea and ships have to reroute, droughts in the Panama Canal, Trump's tariffs. All these kind of things have a lot of different impacts on the shipping industry that you can measure and see kind of what the outcome is in terms of emissions. It can be very difficult to actually tie it back to one thing necessarily, but our high level estimate from our report earlier in the year is that with Trump's tariffs, if you look at the reduction in shipping kind of March, April time, it reduced shipping emissions by about 1%. Now, obviously, Trump was not aiming at reducing emissions at all, but it does just illustrate that these things can actually have a climate benefit. I am absolutely not advocating in any way, shape, or form for Trump's policy making, but with sensible policymakers, you're going to think it through, you can really start to have an impact. And if you go to my image, I can talk through a bit more about what I think an actual sensible policy would look like. So this is a distance weight matrix to kind of illustrate where we should be looking in terms of reducing shipping emissions if we want to do it from the demand side. So along the top is basically what has a long supply chain. So these are, complex goods, for want of a different description, but like things like mobile phones, washing machines, lots of different component parts will have supply chains feeding in from around the world and quite often crossing the world several times, all the rest of it. Whereas things at the bottom that basically have like one input would have shorter supply chains. And then the other thing is how heavy the goods are and how bulky as well. And that is kind of the sweet spot for regulation. If we can think about things that have long supply chains and are also heavy or bulky, you can really have an impact on emissions. And so our the main example that we use are washing machines, because it is a very complex piece of kit that has long supply chains coming around the world. And if you get the right policies that actually mean people are buying washing machines less frequently, so this would be, I think, hopefully coming in at the kind of top of the circular economy model that Ava's just talked us through to actually be useful. But things like, if you had a rule saying no washing machine can be sold unless you have the right to repair it for a certain amount of time, or it must be repairable for a certain amount of time, etc. That could have a material impact. And what I think is really important to think about here as well is, yes, in that scenario, hopefully we are reducing the actual number of containers and the container shipping that those finished washing machines are shipped around the world in. But that should have secondary impacts, right, on, the screws that went into that washing machine as well. And ultimately down to like the bulk goods that are shipped at the start. So you can actually have like serious supply chain impacts, which all add up to real emissions reductions if you do it cleverly and really think it through. We have, this is a very kind of high level initial assessment from our report off the back of those standards categories that we set out. So there's definitely kind of more research to be done on pinpointing, beyond just the washing machines. We definitely have some other suggestions and thoughts, and there's different ways to do it. But I think what it shows, and that combination with the impact of Trump's tariffs, is just to really say there is serious stuff that can be done here. It actually helps on a number of different levels and ties into other policies. that we are looking at and can have like real benefits. So yeah, I would just advocate for all of us to think about it more and come up with even more kind of detailed policy that can really pick this apart and have a nice impact. So.
Thank you very much, Eva, for highlighting the importance of washing machines and other things. Of course, it's not the only thing, and Christian, you said earlier that it's not enough to focus on shipping only. It's probably within shipping not enough to focus on demand reduction only. So the last question would be for you, and would be how can wind propulsion, also a topic where you worked on, complement this demand reduction?
Thank you, and I think the perspectives are coming together really nicely, and I think I need to end on the answer you'll get from any academic in response to any question, and that is, it depends. And that's what we're looking at here, that yes, wind propulsion can complement demand reduction in a variety of ways. But if we go to the image that I've chosen to accompany this particular question, we have, of course, this scene from Jaws where Brody basically tells Quint that he's going to need a bigger boat if they're going to attack the enormous shark that's been spotted in these waters. And it's, of course, a joke in many ways, because we have been moving towards bigger and bigger and bigger cargo ships over the last decades. What was a huge ship 20 years ago is a small to mid-sized ship right now. And in many ways, that's been beneficial to, having economies of scale, but also ecologies of scale in reducing the emissions per container or per ton mile of goods. Ships are more efficient now because of their size. The flip side is, of course, that because shipping is very cyclical in nature, that when the economy is doing well, there's a lot of shipping demand, as a result of which the prices for shipping go up because there is relatively little, shipping space on offer. That gives shipping companies greater revenue and profits, which allows them to invest in new ships and bigger ships, which of course get delivered by the time there's an economic downturn, at which point there is a massive overcapacity, prices for shipping drop immensely, as a result of which there is an added incentive for companies all across the value chain to start outsourcing things to places that are cheaper because shipping is so cheap. And then by the time that the capacity is filled, there is an economic upswing, at which point shipping companies put in new orders for more ships. And this is precisely the logic that, sail cargo companies try to challenge when they started sailing tiny, old, traditionally rigged sailing ships to show that wind propulsion is an option. We're talking 20, 30, 50, 100 tons, not million tons, but tons of goods that were shipped under sail, often with a crew of 12 to 15 people, which is, of course, economically and ecologically completely insignificant. Now, we have shifted to much larger sailing cargo ships. The largest is now around 200 meters long, is a ro-ro vessel built by the French company Neoline, and it is in operation since this year. So there has been that shift to saying, yes, we're going to need a bigger boat, also a bigger sailing boat, but that doesn't necessarily sit very well with that constant pressure within the normal kind of business as usual political economy of the shipping industry to constantly seek those economic and ecologic benefits from scaling up. So it really depends how we're going to combine these things, because an argument often used by people within that, initial first wave or first wind, shall I say, of that sail cargo community was that we need to reduce shipping demand. And by reducing that, we could actually meet all demand with a larger fleet of smaller primary wind vessels. And there is certainly an argument to be made for that. But again, it really depends on how these things kind of come into play and exactly what the right scale of a vessel is, what the right scale of international transport is that is shipped, via the sea, via ships, and how these things are ultimately balanced. And considering that we're facing an incredibly volatile geopolitical situation right now, it's also challenging to see how these big, necessary, grand, abstract ideas around shipping demand, consumption, and circularity and global trade can fit in to the things that we have so little control over. And I think that anyone who'd followed IMO negotiations earlier this year, has a painfully strong memory of how limited our ability might be to influence these geopolitical pressures on what is going on in the shipping industry. So again, this image is very much a comical reflection, but also an invitation to think very critically about what exactly is that scale that we need in order to tackle the shark, I'm sorry, that we collectively face, because that's the situation that we're in right now.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Christian. And thank you to all panelists for their insightful insights. That was really interesting. Good. Well, now that we've unpacked some of the complexities of today's theme, I think it might be time to move on to the second part of this webinar, the Q&A. As Sean mentioned before, you are very, very welcome to ask a question in the Q&A section, which you should be able to find somewhere towards the bottom of your page. And it would be wonderful if you could also indicate what speaker your question is directed to, or if it's directed to all speakers, that's also very fine. But before moving on to that, we would like to invite you to respond to a small poll with 2 simple questions that, if all is well, will pop up on your screen now. Yeah. And the first question sounds out what you believe is the biggest threat to global trade in the coming years. And the second asks what solution you think will have greatest impact on making shipping more sustainable. There are some options there. We will leave this poll open for a while and we'll come back to your answers at the end of the webinar. I see also that, let me check that there are already some questions popping up in the Q&A section. So let's move ahead with that first. Frederic asks if someone could elaborate on the non-greenhouse gas related sources of pollution. So trade also, it's true that we talk a lot about the greenhouse gas side, but there's lots of other problems involved. For example, with the packaging issue connected with the rise of online shopping or with other marine pollution sources. I am wondering, Eva, if there's something to say on plastic and how it links to what we've been talking about here. Would you mind picking up this one?
There is lots to say about plastic. I think the broader issue, on online shopping, if we look at that issue specifically, is that because of this volume, there's absolutely no control with what is in the products or what is in the packaging or what is in any of it. And it is a massive compliance issue. It is, we've, some of our partners and us have seen some completely egregious examples of products that are imported, for example, containing mercury in skin creams, which, I mean, mercury has been banned for 100 years, not 100, 25 in Europe, but it is crazy that this can still be sold directly at the EU market. Similarly, for lots of chemicals that are not allowed in the EU market, but that are found in the plastic or in the products that enter the EU market. Also, other problems like toy safety and fake CE marking and labeling something as recycled plastics that is in fact virgin plastics. And the host of problems and the list of problems is really long, and it's linked, of course, to the volume, that because the volume is so high, we are not able to cope as customs authorities with this volume. And also, I mean, it's a question of, should it really be on the customs authorities to cope with this, or should it be something that we regulate before it's even allowed to be presented to consumers at the EU market? So giving, I mean, this example, giving online marketplaces more responsibility in this regard. But I think, I mean, the question is a very good one, because it's not just about the material greenhouse gas or use of producing the products or shipping the products. It's also all of these biodiversity, pollutant considerations, and ultimately health considerations of the consumers that receive these products that do not live up to any kind of EU safety or environment legislation. So it's really it's a much, much bigger problem than greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you very much. And I see, Eva, that you would also like to comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important question, and I know it's like, what other than greenhouse gases? But I do think one of the important things to flag as well, and I think many of us, and I will absolutely include myself in this, who are working on shipping emissions can fall into the very easy trap of just going, well, you know, if we just change the fuel, then everything will be fine, and we'll find this fuel that will be perfect for the environment and all the rest of it. But actually, you know, that fuel doesn't exist, sadly. And there are definitely better fuels out there. I don't want to suggest that there aren't, and we should definitely be working on doing that. But ultimately, you know, the best fuel for the environment is a fuel you don't use at all. And so like wind is a perfect example. But I think one of the, well, several of the things to, you know, flag on shipping is there's the noise pollution that's really damaging to any number of different marine animals. There's invasive species because, well, I mean, they can just be attached to ships, but also what happens a lot of the time is ships are very heavy when they are traveling from, I mean, this is a gross simplification, but from China to Europe, for example, and then go back empty or relatively less empty, and they actually fill up with water, and then that water gets released somewhere else, which can bring all kinds of things around the world. We are unfortunately seeing shipping starting to go through the Arctic more and more with less sea ice, and there's black carbon, which can have a huge impact. I could go on and on, but I think also just in terms of those future fuels, there are non-GHG impacts as well. So ammonia is one that is talked about and potentially could have, if it's green ammonia, could potentially bring down emissions, but we have to recognize that that is it's a nitrogen carrier, and we have very much exceeded the planetary boundaries on nitrogen. So there's a lot of impacts there that could happen. So yeah, the more that we can reduce, just always a great idea, basically.
Thanks. Lucian?
Yeah, just to add one final thing, and that is that if you look at the totality of greenhouse gas emissions and GDP growth, is that over the last years or decades, you've seen a slight relative decoupling of GDP growth and greenhouse gas emissions. So for every bit of economic growth, there's a little bit less of greenhouse gas emission. There is no absolute decoupling yet, but there's some relative decoupling. But when you look at the material footprint of the global economy, that is not happening at all. So the material footprint of the global economy continues to increase in lockstep with economic growth. And that is, of course, an enormous problem because, well, it's not only how we use certain ores and other basic resources, but the kind of waste that generates, the kind of damage that does to biodiversity, to communities, to landscapes, and how that actually, further transforms what the planet looks like. And I think the combination of that with everything that Eva and Aoife have mentioned earlier, yeah, makes it really important to not just look at greenhouse gas emissions, which is of course what the question was hinting at, that we need to look beyond that. So I very much agree. And the question is a bit, how do we do everything at once in a United Nations system that is very siloed and that doesn't necessarily interact very well across these silos? If we have a solution to that, that'd be fantastic.
Thanks. And maybe I just bounce back the question then, because I think it's very crucial to everything we're talking about today is if everything is so interconnected and has these complexities around, how do we tackle it? What steps are there to be taken? Do you have any ideas on that, Christian? I think.
Well, again, considering how much pressure the multilateral system is under right now, I'm wondering to what extent that we have a possibility to really be a lot more ambitious and make those connections across these different silos in a way that will actually be possible. So I'm a little bit reluctant to be hopeful about this, but I think we definitely do need to think longer term. This is not an issue that can ever be resolved within one presidential mandate. So it's something where we need to start thinking, what does this need to look like in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and ensure that there are pathways of making the necessary changes to make that work. And I'll pass it on to Aoife, I think, who has since raised her hand.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few thoughts. I definitely don't have the here's how we solve it, to be honest. But I think one of the things is we can all fall into the silos. And as I've said, I have definitely fallen into a silo myself. And so I have a lot of sympathy for the regulators who, it's a vast, vast task. And so it's much easier if you can just kind of go, okay, I'm just going to do this bit. So I do just want to flag that. But at the same time, I think, the regulators are smart enough and do know, and it's I guess on us in many ways to try and figure out and help them see the pathways to take those different things into account. So for example, in the EU, the shipping rules, there's fuel standards, fuel EU maritime, which basically will encourage a lot of biofuels into shipping, which we had a study that looked at whether you could achieve the EU's biodiversity targets and also its reduction targets on shipping and aviation. And basically, if you go down a biofuel route, you can't do both. And so it's that kind of how are you setting this biodiversity target over here and then the shipping target over here, and then they're not talking to each other. And I think there's ways in the EU that we can rectify that. And I think we're starting to do that. And I think as a civil society, be better at that. But I think on the UN level, it's probably harder. But at the same time, you do have for example, the Food and Agriculture Organization, which made presentations in the International Maritime Organization around food security. And they were very clear, again, on the biofuel pathway. So I guess I do just want to come in with a bit of hope that we're starting to do better as a community, I think, at doing that. And it probably is for a lot of us to make sure that we're the ones that are like highlighting those holistic pathways and really like, yeah, putting up the roadblocks to going down the pathways that like might solve this one issue, but actually just ignores this other thing over here. So I'm very keen to try and figure out how do we get the like biofuel experts from the Food and Agriculture Organization into the IMO and like talking to those officials and making sure, you know, and I'm sure there's many other corollaries like that that we could do. So yeah, that's my bit of hope that the information is there. If we can just get it all talking to each other, maybe we can solve this.
Maybe. Eva, you wanted to reply?
Yeah, just a very quick comment, and I'm loving the hope. And I was just thinking the same thing when you mentioned the biofuels debate, because I've been working more and more on the bioeconomy strategy, which is also this cross-cutting strategy that is looking, I mean, for now, predominantly at how can we grow the bioeconomy, but really trying to talk to I'm trying to talk to as many actors as possible to understand how we can make sure that we set safeguards so that anything that is considered a bioeconomy is a bioeconomy that is within planetary boundaries. And so I'd be very interested also in connecting more with this community, because if I look at all the industries that I've met and talked to that say they need biomass to decarbonize, the list is much longer than the available biomass. So I think expanding that conversations and more of us in civil society also talking to each other and unlocking those little pockets of information, I think, is a really good start. And then I think on the bigger global work, I think, of course, I would love the EU to set resource reduction targets, but also there's been some very interesting work with the International Resource Panel and the UN Environment Program to really look at, can we have a global resource use target that stays in line with planetary boundaries? And of course, we will need to have that and not just have something at the EU level because of the interconnectedness of resource use globally. That I would be very excited to see a UN initiative to set like a Paris Agreement style set global cap on which resources, when we need to stop extracting which resources, also of what is considered renewable and regenerative in theory. There are limits to how they impact the biodiversity and the environment. So if we could do I'm inventing now a global agreement on that. There are others that have tried, but I think if we're in the space of hope, I would like to see that happen as well.
Nice. Thanks a lot. And let's maybe have a look at the Q&A section again, because I've seen some other questions popping in or popping up. And one is from Anne, and Anne says, shipping is way too cheap, as Christian said. Would increasing the costs of shipping help to reduce consumer demand, and how could that be done in a fair and just way? I guess it relates to the question of economic incentives or financial incentives we were talking about earlier, but what would be the link, or could it be helpful to just increase costs of shipping? Eva, maybe I wanted to direct that question to you. And how could that be done?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say yes. I mean, I think it can, and I think we can increase the cost of shipping and do it in a just and equitable way. I mean, a lot of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world have been calling for this in the IMO for over a decade, to be honest. Because at the moment, one of the things with shipping that we haven't gone into is that it actually pays very little tax as a sector on the whole. And that is to do with tonnage tax, which is basically like a lot of European and one or two Asian countries have replicated now. But you, as a shipping company, pay taxes based on how much deadweight tonnage you have. So if you make enormous profits, you don't pay a percentage of those profits like most companies do. You just pay a flat rate of tax, which basically means when you make enormous profits, you just get to keep them. So there is, and the vast majority of those profits as well are in the container industry. So I think there's very clever ways that if we really wanted to do it on an equitable way, we could. But at the very least, I mean, I think in 2025, it's pretty uncontroversial, I would say, to say that those who pollute should pay for it. And then, of course, the EU will hopefully generate a pot of revenue that you can use to ensure that the transition is just and equitable. And I think part of that has to start with the recognition that a lot of damage has already been done by the emissions of the shipping industry, and that needs to be supported for those countries where they're already facing huge climate impacts and they just need support for adaptation. And then we can get on to mitigation, I would say broadly, but if you want to focus it on the shipping sector, there's lots of stuff we could talk about there as well. But yeah, I think it's absolutely possible to do it in a just and equitable way. And then Christian's going to build on that, I hope. So I'll pass to him.
Yeah, thank you. And I absolutely agree. Putting a price on shipping emissions, making polluter pay, fairly taxing shipping company profits. Those are, that's very low-hanging fruit. That should have happened a long time ago. But of course, the fact that it hasn't shows the incredible lobbying force of both the shipping industry and of major shipping countries that would prefer that to not happen. So, but in order to build on the actual question, to go beyond that, I do wonder if increasing the cost of shipping is the best way to reduce demand of consumers. It may be a very minor side effect, but I think that the focus should be much more on the product standards. Because when we talk about consuming less, what a lot of people hear is, I cannot have the things I want to have. But that is not what consuming less means. For the most part, it means consuming less often. And it means buying a toaster that is actually built to last. Buying a fridge that is not only, doesn't only have a high energy standard, but is also built to last. And you can apply that to each and every of the issues, including the washing machines that Aoife was talking about. These things can be built to last, but it is more profitable to make them and build them with a very clear expiry date built into these machines. And that is what is completely unacceptable. It's a massive waste of resources, of energy, of transport, of people's time and efforts to, get these devices to allow us to live, easier lives on that front. I don't want to wash my clothes by hand. I love having a washing machine. No one should have to do without a washing machine. But let us please have a washing machine that's built to last a lifetime, because that means that we don't need to ship so many things, and that reduces consumption. Unfortunately, right now, it's not sufficiently profitable to do that. And also, there is not enough regulatory pressure to push manufacturers in that direction, because on their own, they're not going to do it. So I think that for the most part, for most consumer products, insisting on quality, durability, repairability, and so on is much more important than trying to lower demand through increasing shipping prices, even if by by levying greenhouse gas emissions and insisting on fair taxation, that would be an inevitable effect. But that, I'm not sure that's the best mechanism.
Thank you. And I think, I agree with many points. And I think also what you say, Christian, it seems like to have a washing machine, to be able to buy a washing machine that lasts, policy has a crucial role to play. And I think we touched upon it earlier a couple of times, but Eva, maybe it's useful for this webinar also to kind of know where we're at with policy. You mentioned the Circular Economy Act earlier. Is this the crucial file we should, as NGOs, be focusing on? Are there other things happening that are either a threat or an opportunity for this?
Yes, I mean, Circular Economy Act unfortunately seems very focused on secondary raw materials and that resilience part of it. But I think what you mentioned, Christian, is a very central part to the Eco Design for Sustainable Products regulation. And that is, of course, in an implementation phase that is very slow. But it is a very good piece of legislation in principle because it has not just one, but 16 impact categories, looking across everything from environmental footprint to repairability to recyclability to water use, etc. So really looking much more holistically at impacts of products, and of course designing for durability and banning planned obsolescence, banning the destruction of unsold goods. That's all part of this legislation. But I mean, the devil is in the implementation, and I think that's where we have a real risk now. First of all, of it being slow, and second of all, of it being watered down during the process, because it is a very consultative process and there's a lot of information and a lot of heavy lobbying going on there. So that is a risk. And the third issue there is the compliance problem, because as I mentioned already now, before even eco-design, the eco-design for sustainable products regulation entering into force, we have a problem of compliance with basic CE marking or basic safety regulations. So being able to ensure that we don't have a unfair competition from non-compliant products flooding the European market as we introduce these requirements is really important. And then I would say a fourth risk here, both to ESPR, but also to things like the Right to Repair Directive and other key pieces of legislation, is this ongoing simplification agenda, which, I mean, you probably all saw the Environment Omnibus being unveiled yesterday, and which was the 8th omnibus since February, which is regulation. I mean, it has already been judged as maladministration by the ombudswoman. It is regulation in complete reverse with complete reverse objectives and going at a speed that no one can follow. A lot of businesses I know are also not happy with the speed because it does not allow for impact assessment. It does not allow for proper consultation on whether or not it erodes those original objectives of environmental legislation. So I would say, I mean, for something to keep an eye on, do keep an eye on the simplification agenda, because there are so many files and so many potential loopholes coming out of those, both what is presented by the Commission and what are amendments introduced by the Parliament, that it's almost impossible to keep track of all of it. And I think we need all of us to be vigilant about implementation, not to be slowed down through the simplification agenda, but also through the other issues I highlighted.
Yeah, thank you. Important point. Thank you very much. I feel as if this conversation could go on forever. Sadly, we only have, let me look, 10 minutes left. So we will have to end the Q&A here. However, we still owe you the results of the poll we launched. We have a new member on the call. We still owe you the reports of the poll we launched at the beginning of the Q&A. So I would like, well, it's popping up on my screen. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So let's have a look at the answers to those questions. And I don't seem to see the answers to the first one. But we can do the second one first. So which solution will have the greatest impact on making shipping decarbonize and become more sustainable, was the question to the public. And we have 4 answers there: wind propulsion, reduction of shipping demand, zero to near zero emission fuel, and efficiency measures. It seems as the 3 first ones are the most popular ones, and then only 1 person believes in efficiency measures. A question to the panelists: do you agree that those 3 first ones are the essential ones to focus on? Maybe Christiana, I'll start with you. It's gonna be everything. We will need everything, but
yeah, I think the thing is, of course, that there are some of these measures that will strengthen each other, and others that may not necessarily strengthen each other. So, for example, efficiency measures, wind propulsion, and those new fuels actually reinforce each other. So the more efficiency and wind you have, the less you need of those new fuels, which makes it a lot easier and faster and cheaper to make that transition. Demand reduction is a tricky one because it depends on when and how quickly that would happen. Because if there's a real quick drop off in demand, as we often see when there's an economic downturn, there will be overcapacity, which has two implications. One is that usually ships start operating more slowly because they'll burn a lot less fuel to transport the same cargo. So it's a way for shipping companies to recoup some of the losses from lower rates for shipping by having less in terms of operating costs. But at the same time, if that downturn takes too long, it means that there is a reduced incentive or a reduced signal to the industry to actually start investing in new ships and new technologies, because they'll be able to keep on meeting demand with the fleet that they already have at reduced rates. So it's something that can kind of play into that question somewhat in somewhat contradictory terms. I'm not saying that reduction of demand is bad, not at all. I think it's great and should be pursued when and wherever possible, but it can have a bit of a perverse effect on how these other elements interlink and interplay in that longer term transition.
Thanks a lot. Very interesting. And I see that the answers to the first question have popped up now on my screen at least. I hope you can see them as well. So Trump is in the middle. That's a surprise. Trump, tensions, wars, and then there's other terms surrounding them. I don't know. Eva, maybe do you have any thoughts on what came out of this? Do you think Trump should be in the middle?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't disagree with the answers that people have put in there at all. But I guess what I would say, and this is my very optimistic nature, which luckily has not been entirely crushed yet. But I do think that Trump is actually losing power almost day by day. His unstable coalition is turning against him. He has discovered that actually tariffs are putting up prices for Americans, which is basically what he got elected to stop. It's actually really tricky, and this is not something we've gotten into so much on this webinar today, but it's been mentioned a little bit, but the global companies that control international trade and the system is really set up for them and their profits and how they book profits around the world, and the shipping industry is very interconnected in terms of the flags of convenience they use, all kinds of stuff like that. It's actually really hard to, as a politician, stand up and interfere with any of that, even if you are Trump, which is how you can see that various different companies get in front of him and then they get an exemption from the tariff for their entire sector and various things like that. So in one way, I think that actually a lot of this is going to be died down just because it's not in the interest of global companies, which is maybe a very dystopian way to look at it, actually. But it's giving me hope in terms of maybe a bit more multilateralism can come back and we can achieve a bit more internationally. But I don't necessarily disagree with what people have put in, and it's a bit of a scary time to be looking at this. But on the other hand, we do have all of those solutions. And just the one thing to add what Christian said about the second answer, the final one, the efficiency measures that didn't get so many votes, that is actually the thing that we could implement today, right? That's the bit that we could reduce emissions by, and there's various different estimates, but it could be as much as 40-50% just by, Christian mentioned slowing down, cleaning holes, making sure your propellers been started, all these kind of little things can actually reduce emissions today, as I said. So, it is, and again, I think it comes back to a lot of us in our silos, but in many ways, that is the thing that we can do instantly and easily, and yet it's not where policy is. It's a really tricky one. So yeah, on that note, that's what I have to say.
Thank you. I guess we're somewhere in between fear and hope, somewhere. Eva, is there any last comment from your side on the poll?
No, I think this has been a really interesting discussion. Also, some great comments from the other panelists. I think the two things that stand out for me, I mean, in the word of Trump and that kind of whole geopolitical tensions, is linking back to what I was saying before about the simplification agenda, because to me, the EU is right now taking the wrong response to that uncertainty. The right response would be to stand firm, improve our standards, and make sure that we are competing on quality and high standards, rather than saying, oh, the US is doing deregulation. Well, we should do that too, because, you know, then we can be competitive. So it's kind of yeah, I think the response is not the right one for the sake of, maybe for the sake of short-term competitiveness for some sectors, but certainly not for long-term competitiveness, and definitely not for people and the planet. And the other word that stood out here that we haven't mentioned so much, but is the word influencing. I think that is really like the level of manipulation that we are facing as consumers through advertising, through influencers, through the online space, but also the offline space. I think there's so much. Also, we were talking about AI before this call started. AI is putting all of this into hyperdrive because of the more realistic levels of manipulation that we can be subjected to. So I'm really also curious and excited about some of the work that will happen with the Consumer Agenda and the Digital Fairness Act to really try to cap the level of influencing that we're put under, to at least eliminate the consumption that is not related to our washing machines or the things we actually need, but are related to things that were also mentioned in one of the comments, like, you know, buying lots of clothes every day that you wear twice and then throw in the landfill, essentially.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I couldn't agree more. This conversation could truly go on for a while, but I suppose that that only shows the relevance of the topic and the importance of the work that you are doing as well, and the need to work interdisciplinarily to achieve systemic change. I think that's one of my takeaways. I would really like to thank all the speakers for their participation today, their presentations, and insightful answers to the questions. And before closing off, I hand over to Shan for some closing remarks. Shan.
Thank you, Bavo. As I said at the beginning, Black Friday is behind us, and Christmas, for those that celebrate it, is on the horizon. And we're all being encouraged to buy. And throughout the coming year, there will be more and more opportunities to consume. I think today's presentations, along with the questions and answers, have certainly given me a lot of food for thought. And I think I need to ask myself some really tough questions about where the gifts I'm buying for friends and family come from. How do they get to me? What impact are my choices having? And it's not just about the gifts, but about choices I'm making every day with day-to-day purchases, and also electronic goods and white goods. I hope the webinar has given everyone something to think about and some time to just sort of reflect on the choices that we are making. Bavo has already thanked our speakers, and so I think that just leaves it to me to thank you, the participants, for joining us today and for providing the questions and contributing to the poll and the discussion. So thank you. As I said at the beginning, it's our intention to make the recording of the webinar available on the Seas at Risk website, and we plan to organise future webinars in 2026, which we'll let you know about. In the meantime, I hope you found today's discussion useful, and if you have any feedback, we would very much welcome it. So thank you, everyone, and happy end of the year break. Thank you.
Thank you.